War is often remembered through battles, generals and grand strategy, but the story of survival for the civilian population is largely ignored. Across Europe, during the Second World War, millions faced the collapse of supply chains, rationing and outright famine. What is less known is how ordinary people, particularly peasants and rural communities, employed ingenious methods to maintain food security despite occupation, resource scarcity, and bureaucratic inefficiencies. These were not heroic tales in the traditional sense, they were pragmatic adaptations to necessity. Some of these methods were so effective that they influenced post-war agricultural policy and remain relevant in discussions of sustainable survival and self-reliance.
Understanding these practices gives us insight not just into the war itself, but into human ingenuity under extreme pressure. Peasants turned small plots into year-round sources of food through crop succession planning. One of the most overlooked survival strategies involved careful sequencing of crops to maximize yield from limited land. In occupied France, for example, farmers learned to plant fast-maturing crops immediately after a harvest to avoid leaving soil fallow. In Germany, similar strategies were encouraged by local agricultural authorities who issued guidelines on rotation schedules that balanced caloric density with soil preservation. These practices required meticulous planning, knowledge of seasonal cycles, and an understanding of local microclimates, skills that were essential for survival but rarely acknowledged in broader histories of the war. Storing root vegetables in improvised cellars became a hidden art. While rations dictated the official distribution of food, many rural households developed elaborate storage systems that could sustain them through winter and periods of extreme scarcity. In Poland and the Soviet Union, peasants often dug underground pits lined with straw or sawdust to store potatoes, carrots, and turnips. The design of these storage systems was simple but sophisticated, balancing airflow, moisture control, and accessibility. Such cellars became critical not only for feeding families but also for sustaining local barter economies when official rations ran out. These practices illustrate how understanding the principles of preservation and microclimate management was not just a convenience, it was a necessity for survival. In addition to storage, fermentation and pickling were, honestly, just vital techniques. Communities in Eastern Europe relied on sauerkraut, kimchi-like preparations, and pickled root vegetables as staples. These methods were inexpensive, did not require complex equipment, and created foods rich in nutrients that might otherwise degrade during storage. Historical accounts indicate that these foods were especially critical in harsh winters when calories were scarce, and they also supported the gut health and immunity of populations under constant stress. For survivalists today, the lessons are clear. Mastering basic preservation techniques can create a sustainable buffer against food insecurity, even with minimal resources. Livestock was managed with extreme efficiency to maximize output. In the German-occupied Netherlands, some farmers developed zero-waste feeding systems, recycling kitchen scraps, weeds and straw to feed livestock. Eggs, milk and meat were rationed carefully, with families often consuming only what could be replaced quickly, ensuring continuous productivity rather than short-term abundance. The strategic planning extended to breeding cycles, ensuring that new animals were born at times that coincided with the availability of supplemental feed. This approach reflects a deep understanding of ecological and seasonal cycles, an awareness that modern industrialized farming often overlooks. Not all survival strategies depended on official or even semi-official agricultural guidance. In occupied Eastern Europe, peasants frequently maintained concealed plots behind hedgerows, forests, or abandoned buildings. Foraging for wild greens, mushrooms, and berries became a crucial survival skill. What is striking is the creativity involved. individuals learned to disguise their efforts, choosing locations and crops that would go unnoticed by occupying forces or ration inspectors, demonstrating a level of adaptive thinking that historians often understate. Food security during the war was rarely an individual endeavor. Extended families, villages, and informal networks shared knowledge, labor, and resources. In parts of Italy, community-managed communal gardens were organized to allocate land equitably among families. Such cooperation was not only practical but also socially reinforcing, providing a buffer against isolation and the psychological strain of occupation. Finally, the very constraints imposed by wartime bureaucracy sometimes forced ingenuity. In Germany and France, families who carefully tracked ration coupons, stored surplus strategically, and cultivated side gardens effectively created their own parallel supply chains. In examining these 7 strategies, crop succession, root storage, fermentation, efficient livestock management, hidden gardens, community cooperation, and adaptive responses to bureaucracy, we see a form of wartime intelligence that is rarely recognized in popular histories. Remembering these practices matters because they illuminate resilience in its most fundamental form. If you found this exploration of wartime ingenuity enlightening, subscribe to the channel for more in-depth historical analysis, and share this video with others who value a closer, more thoughtful look at history.